really enjoy making boxes. They're a fantastic project that is low on the amount of material you need. There's so much variation in design and techniques that you can use. It also helps really hone a bunch of fundamental woodworking techniques. And if you can build a box, you can pretty much build any piece of furniture. In this series of videos, I'm going to be looking at different ways to make different types of boxes. So different techniques, different designs, different joinery methods, different finishing methods. In this particular video, we'll be looking at these three mitred boxes. We've got a hexagonal box with a lip, box with a lid and just a tray. We've got splines, we've got keys, lots of good stuff going on. In future videos, we'll be looking at rabbeted boxes, box joins, dovetails, as well as different finishing techniques for things like flocking on the inside, as well as exterior top coats, whether that's a varnish, an oil or a paint of some sort. Before we get stuck into making boxes like this, you need to have dressed or jointed material. If it's not square all four sides, you're going to have real trouble cutting the joinery, and thus your box is going to be less box shaped and more, well, diamond shaped. If your material is out of square, your joints can't really be referenced on table saw, on sleds, on jigs, on whatever, and still come out square. Now, it is a little bit outside the scope of this particular video, but you will need to have a jointer, a thicknesser, and a table saw if you're going for the machine and power tool approach. Those are really the basic, though expensive machines for making material square, so those are the best options. Of course, if you're going for hand tools, you can use a couple of different planes and a saw of some sort, but again, it's sort of a little bit outside the scope of this video. If you don't have those machines or the hand planes available, consider buying dressed all round S4S or S3S stock, that is square 4 sides, square 3 sides, or dressed all round. Those in theory will be square when you buy them from the store. That extra bit of processing will make them a little bit more expensive, but then you don't have to dress it yourself. Do double check that they are square. Depending on how long they've been sitting on the shelves, they may be very far from that. The other option is using sheet goods like MDF or plywood, then veneering the box afterwards. And that is a very viable option because it does give you, well, more flexibility with joinery, as you don't have to worry about wood movement. And veneered boxes can just look fantastic. So don't discount that just because you don't think it's proper because it's plywood. With the material dressed, we can go straight to the saw and start cutting joinery, right? Not so much. We do need to talk about the thickness of the material because that really affects the overall aesthetic. Probably more than you'd think if you haven't made a box before. In front of me here, I've got some 30mm material. It's quite heavy, both visually and, well, weight-wise. If we were to make a small box, let's say sort of this A5 size, this would just be so overpowering. The box would be far too heavy to lift up comfortably. You wouldn't expect it to be that thick, and you compromise both the size of what you can store inside or the outside. Just visually doesn't work. So you generally want to avoid material anywhere near that thick unless you're making... No, you just generally want to avoid making material that thick for boxes of any sort. Even a chest of some sort isn't going to use material that thick. Next up is some thinner material, this 15mm stock, and we're getting a lot closer to what is acceptable. But if we come in close here for this same A5 size, there's quite the contrast, and again, the 15mm feels really visually heavy, even if it's not physically heavy. So this inner box here is my go-to thickness, which is 3/8 of an inch or 9.5mm. You can see the difference in just visual weight. The 15mm is just too heavy for this size box. Now, if you were to make very small boxes, something like this, for example, you wouldn't use 3/8 material. You'd go down to 1/4 inch or 6.35mm. Or if you were to make some dividers or little trays that go inside this type of box, again, you'd go for that smaller size as sort of a hierarchy where you've got the big box on the outside and then progressively smaller boxes on the inside. That being said, most of the boxes in this video are going to be 3/8 of an inch because it's just a good number that works well visually, and I've got a 3/8 inch dado stack, so that works really well too. The miter saw might seem like the obvious choice for cutting miters on things, but for something as small as, say, the short end pieces on this box, it's going to get pretty dicey bringing the saw down and trying not to cut off your fingers. Doesn't really matter whether the saw is vertical or tilted, it's going to be pretty dicey. On a larger box, maybe not so much of an issue, but even then, miter saws are not renowned for being as accurate as other tools. There is flex and play in the sliding mechanism. If you've got a non-sliding saw, it's a little bit more accurate. The router table also seems like quite a strong contender. Router bits tend to be very accurate in their grinds, and you can use either a V-bit or a chamfer bit. The problem is you can't really use a fence as you're going along the fence. Your reference surface is slowly disappearing as you're cutting through it. So the fence is out of contention. Either need to use a miter gauge. A sacrificial board on the miter gauge will help prevent a tear out, or you need to use a coping sled. Now, I don't have a coping sled, but that would be actually my preference over a miter gauge, because I find miter gauges at the router table tend to shift just a little bit due to the forces applied by a router bit. It kind of, as it's rotating, wants to pull the bit towards it just that little bit more than perhaps at the table saw. Speaking of, let's head there now. Without a doubt, the king of cutting is the table saw, and the crown, I guess, on the king of cutting is the cross-cut sled, which lets you do very accurate, very smooth cuts, especially when you compare it to a miter gauge. A miter gauge's main problem is as it's sliding along, friction on the workpiece can cause it to wobble around a little bit. So you can't really hold it down, you can only hold it back towards the gauge, because if you hold it down, it's not going to move. Either way, it doesn't really matter. For this type of operation, using a crosscut sled is nice and easy. It's very simple. We've got a stop block. This particular sled has a replaceable insert, so I can switch between 90 degrees and whatever angle I want. I just need to put in a new insert. So it's not a specialty sled as such, so I can do whatever sided box I want using the one sled. Setting the 45-degree angle for your saw blade is the most crucial step. If you are unsure that it is the correct angle, do test pieces. It's much better to sacrifice scrap material than your actual workpiece. To set everything to the correct angle, I like to use these little angle cubes, zeroing it on the throat plate of my table saw, rotating it and attaching it to the plate of the blade. Make sure you're avoiding the teeth. We want the plate. If it's touching the teeth, you are not going to get an accurate measurement. Easy. Now, if you can't get to that 45-degree mark, double check whether your saw has compacted sawdust in the trunnions, as that can often prevent you from rotating all the way around. And if you still can't get to that 45-degree mark, check your table saw whether it has these limiters. On the saw stop saws, they have these two grub screws here, which will prevent you going past 90 and past 45. This is so you can accurately set hard stops to be exactly the correct angles. And whatever you do, avoid using this gauge here for any sort of accurate measurement. This should only be used as a guide on whatever saw you've got. It can't really be calibrated, so it cannot be made accurately. I have the blade tilted to 45 degrees. It is slightly above the thickness of the material. I have the material itself clamped down, and I have two stops set up. The first one is a flip stop. This will be my short edge. The second one is for the long edge. One of the reasons for the two stops is that I'm not going to be cutting both of the long edges first or both of the short edges. I'm going to be alternating. This is less efficient in terms of material used, but it will present with the outside of the board going, well, on the outside of the box, meaning that it'll be a grain wrapped box. Now, this board isn't quite long enough, so it's not going to be 100% there, but the general principle still applies. One cut is made, then the board is flipped to complete that section of the box. The bevel left behind on the board needs to be cut off to maintain the grain wrapping. That is, the outside of the box is always the same side of the board. If you look at those cuts, we can see that they line up pretty well. It's much more invisible than if we had have just done alternating cuts like so. Not a huge difference in this particular board, but still makes a difference. And when it's made to be a corner, that really drives the point home. Before we glue this up, we need to think about the top, the lid, and the bottom. And that's where it can get a little bit tricky because it depends on a whole bunch of different things. Plywood or MDF bottom, whether it's veneered, painted, whatever, super easy. You can glue that straight in, no concerns with wood movement. You might want to do a rebate or a groove for the panel to sit in. Doesn't really matter, do it however you like and it'll work. If you're going for a groove rather than a rebate, you need to cut that now because once it's glued up, can't really pop the panel in. And we'll cover that in a moment. But if you're going for a solid wood panel, you need to make some decisions about wood movement. Something this scale isn't going to move a whole lot. However, it is still likely to move and there could be some potential issues. So you're generally speaking wanting to go for a floating panel. Floating panel means that you're going to want to do a dado groove all the way around. That needs to be done before glue up. When you're cutting the groove for the panel, the nice thing about mitre joinery is that you don't have to do any stopped cuts. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility with how you actually cut the dado in the first place, the groove in the first place. You can use the router table, you can use a table saw, you can use a dado stack on the table saw, or just a single blade with a couple of passes. You could probably use a plunge router or a circular saw or something like that. Rig it up if you can hold the pieces securely. It's not really a big deal. Really whatever works for you. Because I've got two of these boxes, I'm going to make this one just a simple tray that'll receive just a rebate, which I'll do on the router table. And for this second box, it will get a floating panel that'll be done on the table saw and using a router plane. Starting with the tray, the rebate is cut at the router table. This can be done vertically or horizontally. I felt with the push block I had on hand, it was a little easier to do vertically, but the results are the same. Before glue up, the insides are sanded, as sanding afterwards is a real chore. I've made a little fixture that is very similar to my small parts routing jig, which uses a wedge as a clamp. The fences on the jig are 6mm, just a few millimetres less than the thickness of the workpiece. For gluing mitres, blue tape is really your friend, with the inside of the box facing down, but the pieces together and stretch the blue tape over it. Blue painter's tape has a degree of elasticity to it, so it wants to pull everything tight. In my case, unfortunately, I had to leave it for a few weeks before cutting, so it required a little bit more encouragement in the form of a band clamp to pull it tight. The tray is all glued up, it's dried, the mitres are nice and tight. However, mitres are not the strongest joint out there and it often pays to reinforce them. There may not be any immediately obvious things that are going to go wrong with them, but if it drops on the corner, it is more likely to break, or perhaps even over time, the mitres may open up. As again, it's not a very strong mechanical joint. We're relying entirely on the glue, and as the wood expands and contracts, that glue may become brittle and eventually fail. There are two main ways to reinforce a joint. However, language is a bit of a funny thing, so what we call those reinforcements has changed over the years. If we take two pieces here, initially a reinforcement that would be hidden and go along the full width of the joint would be called a spline. These days, instead, a spline goes across the joint. Conversely, what used to go across the joint was previously called a key. Now a key is what goes along the width. So I'm going to go with that definition where a spline goes across the joint and a key goes along the whole width of it. So to reinforce the joint with a spline, we need to cut a curve across the corner. That's then going to be filled with a piece of wood. That wood is going to be long grain to long grain glue up, and it's going to help prevent the two pieces from pulling apart. I'm actually going to go with pieces of veneer to reinforce my joint. So I'll make a very thin curve with a handsaw, stick some veneer in, glue it in, trim it up, it'll be nice and strong. You might think veneer is not particularly strong. Well, across the grain, veneer is very easy to split. It doesn't take much pressure at all. However, along the grain, that's incredibly difficult to actually pull apart, and that's where we actually want those reinforcements in. So it doesn't really matter that this is not strong across the grain, but along the grain, it is more than strong enough to reinforce this joint. A common way to make the curves for the splines is here at the table saw with a jig that sort of acts like a vertical mitre gauge, holds the piece at an angle, run it through on all corners, and that'll leave an angled curve or a curve that goes along the angle of the joint that you can then fill with wood. The only downside with that is it leaves a curve the size of your saw blade, so that's going to be typically 1/8 of an inch, 3.5 whatever millimeters, which can be relatively large and jarring depending on the size of the box. You can also angle the blade for a bit of decoration or use the router table with a variety of different bits for different patterns, but again, they're going to be relatively large, so it's going to stand out. In some cases, this is going to be quite a nice decorative feature, in others, not so much. To get the best fit for the veneer, I'm comparing my two backed saws, a Veritas dovetail saw and a Japanese Dazuki. Both have a thin kerf, but the Dazuki is slightly thinner, which matched the particular veneer that I was using. Some veneer may be thicker. Lines were drawn on both sides of the corner where I wanted the spline, and it was as simple as cutting down to both of them. After the glue is dried, the veneer can be cut with a flush trim saw, but I find it much easier just to pare it back with a sharp chisel. For the tray, as this was a demo box to show off the video, it's just receiving a basic MDF panel, but normally I would opt for plywood. For the tray, I'm going to flock the inside of it. This is going to be a very brief overview of flocking. If there is more interest, I'll take a deeper dive look at it. Flocking powder is loaded into the applicator ahead of time. Then the box is painted with a thick coat of the flocking adhesive. The tray is placed inside a plastic tub to contain the mess. Then a pumping action with a flocking applicator distributes the flocking onto the wet adhesive. There is no such thing as too much flocking. This takes about 24 hours to dry, and once dried, the excess flocking will just fall off, which can be collected and used on the next project. The floating panel box requires a groove for the panel to sit in. This can be cut with a dado stack, router table, or even just a single saw blade, which is what I'm doing. This just requires multiple passes to get a wider groove. The fence is adjusted after a pass on all parts, stepping over just slightly. The saw blade I'm using does not have a flat tooth grind, so it leaves behind a ridge. A router plane cleans this up very quickly. This is not strictly required, the groove is entirely invisible once assembled, but doing so can be a good way to ensure the groove has a consistent depth across all parts. This box receives the keys. Back at the table saw with the blade tilted to 45 degrees, a shallow non-through cut is made on the inside of the joint. A stop block is positioned about 2mm away from the kerf, and this can be used on all sides of the box. To fill the kerfs, thin strips of contrasting wood are cut down at the bandsaw. For the solid wood box that gets the keys and the dado for the bottom panel, I've made up the hardwood panel. There's nothing fancy. It measures slightly longer and slightly wider than the inner diameter of the box, plus the depth of one of the grooves and a hair more. So rather than going twice the depth, we want a little bit of room, particularly on the width for the panel to expand and contract, because this won't be glued in. That is a concern with any solid wood panels. You need to make sure that there is room for wood expansion. Now this doesn't fit in thickness wise, and that's okay. We don't want it to be an exact fit. You could of course go to the thicknesser or drum sander to really dial in that fit, but a better way is to add a small rebate to one side that'll go on the bottom side. And we can do that over here at the router table using a straight bit and the router table fence. The lid is the same size as the box, so a rebate all the way around matching the walls of the box will cause it to drop into the box. The height of the rebate isn't overly important, 5mm or so is more than enough. The important detail is the width of the rebate, so this can be done over multiple passes, slowly sneaking up on the exact fit. Unfortunately, I didn't make those adjustments quite as small as I thought I did, and the box doesn't have a real piston fit. A chamfer on the underside of the lid creates a shadow line that helps mask my mistake, as well as adding a nice little detail. Finally, a small block of contrasting wood is glued to the lid as a pull. While technically what I showed works just fine, it's an inefficient way to make a Mitre box. This third box is more about that efficiency. Instead of cutting the pieces then making the grooves, take a long board and cut the groove for the base and the lid. Then a wider groove can be made in between. This will serve as a way to register the lid onto the box body. Once the 3 grooves are cut, the board can be mitred. This will be a hexagonal box, so the saw is tilted to 30 degrees rather than 45 degrees, but this method will work for however many sided box that you want. The panels for both the lid and base are identical and can be rough cut out of the bandsaw into a hexagon shape. If you were batching these out, a table saw sled would be much faster. As I'm not, they can be taken to a shooting board to be cleaned up. This process goes very quickly. After they're cleaned up, it's over to the router table to create the shallowest of rebates on the panels. The lid for this box is integrated into the body and I need to separate the two out, otherwise it's not actually a very good box if you can't open it. If this was a 4-sided box, you could very easily do this on the bandsaw, just slicing it off if that's what you want to do. With a hex-shaped box like this, you do not want to do that. This is one of the rare occasions where you can actually get kickback on a bandsaw, as this is an unsupported section here. As the blade is pulling down, it will rotate the piece on you and can be quite disastrous. So without some sort of sled, some sort of jig to hold this in this position, don't do it. Instead, over here at the table saw is a much better way and oddly safer way to separate the lid from the box. The blade is set just slightly below the material thickness. I've got a scrap here. It's probably about a 2mm amount of material that'll be left behind. That'll give us a nice guide for coming back with a handsaw to separate it out. Basically, the box will get pushed up against the fence nice and tight. I'll slowly run it over the table saw blade on one face, rotate to another face, so on and so forth, until there is just that 2mm ring left behind. Then it can be taken to the workbench and with a handsaw just cut through that, or even a knife if you've left just a thin onion skin. Then that remaining material can be pared off or sanded off to get a nice tight fit with the lid. Unfortunately, I've realised I've made quite a big mistake here. When I cut the top off, I was supposed to bisect the inner dado. Instead, I cut it off from the top, which means that when I was putting the matching pieces in for the lid, they don't mate up with anything and the lid won't actually fit on. So I'm having to come back with a router plane because I don't have a router bit that matches sort of this size and just nibble away, creating a little rebate on the inside here. It's not ideal, but it'll fix the box and I won't have to make a whole new one. The nice thing about boxes when it comes to finishing is there's not really any wrong finish, wrong sheen, wrong type of finish, whatever. These, generally speaking, don't need a lot of protection, so you can use really any finish, any sort of varnish or oil or wax or whatever. In my case, I am using Livos Kunos. I've got a little bit of that to use up. It's a hard wax oil and it really makes these particular timbers pop. This will give me a satin sort of sheen, which I like on a lot of wood projects and furniture, but there's nothing wrong if you want to go with a glossier sheen, particularly on a craft small item. Gloss can be problematic when you are doing large furniture, particularly high gloss. You don't necessarily want a dining table that acts as a mirror, but on small projects like boxes, you can definitely get away with that. This finish is lovely to apply for this type of item because it's just a wipe on, let it soak in for 15 minutes, then wipe off, apply 2 to 3 coats. On the bottom I'll probably only apply the 1 coat, but everywhere else we'll get 3 coats. I have a history with hexagons where they've given me nightmares in the past, but I'm really happy with how the hex boxes turned out, and wasn't for the silly mistake I made cutting off that dado, I'd definitely say this was my favourite box. I'll need to make another one of these. That was quite fun to make. I definitely prefer the splines over the keys, but these are still nice boxes and I'm glad that I've made them. The next episode will likely be on flocking or on pinned rebate and box join boxes. If you made it this far, that's quite the gargantuan effort. Thanks for watching.